welcome back to another episode of Sipping Saints. We are really excited to be back. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about prayer. This is a very integrated part of faith, and it's a very vital part of faith. And so we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion on prayer and why is it important in our walk with Jesus. So first, what are you sipping, Josiah? You got a fancy cup today.
That was a great transition.
Yeah, it was.
I'm sipping Folgers coffee with a oat milk creamer or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, we stepped it up from Kool-Aid.
Oat milk.
Yeah. One step up here. This is my usual morning drink.
I've got my typical drink, which is ice mountain water. It's always boring because I always forget to get something interesting in time for the podcast. So yeah.
I'm drinking my normal cup of coffee, Cafe Bustelo, I guess what it's called.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Classic.
classic. So
Got my oat milk flat white with my Christmas cup.
Wow. That is
Fancy.
$8 drink.
yeah, it is.
Starbucks is crazy expensive. We just full stop.
It is, but everything's expensive right now. Am I
That's
right?
true.
Unless you drink water.
There you
Wow.
go.
You know how much money I've saved on not drinking coffee?
All right.
That's true.
I have our first question. How has your understanding of prayer evolved since your childhood or teenage years?
Wow.
Goodness.
So, like, most of us probably have grown up in a Christian home, so we have some sort of background or understanding of prayer. How has that sort of changed over the years?
That's a good question. I would say for me, I kind of grew up in a Christian home, so I was not a Christian or follower of Jesus until I hit 6th grade. But even then, like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, it's not like I was fully committed and like living out my faith as a middle schooler. I was trying. I was going to youth group and all that. But it wasn't until high school that I really felt like I committed my life to Jesus and started following him and really growing a relationship with the Lord. And so I think prayer before then was, or in my high school, college age, maybe more so high school, was trying to figure out the right words to say. And like, I feel like I need to formulate it in such a way that God's going to understand me. And feeling like I was hearing my youth pastor pray. I was hearing the senior pastor pray. I was hearing all these leaders pray. And I was like, I need to emulate how they pray, or I need to like copycat how they pray. And it wasn't until like college and beyond college that my prayers became my own language and not trying to copy someone else's language. And so in that sense, I feel like they became more organic. They became more natural. It felt like I was more so having a conversation with God than I was trying to recite some sort of structure, trying to recite some sort of language that I was hearing from other people. I did a prayer sermon series with our youth a couple of months ago, and I told them that prayer simply is just a heart-to-heart conversation with God. So that doesn't mean you need to structure it a certain way. It doesn't mean that there needs to be any sort of process, but it's acknowledging that God is inviting you into a conversation with him, and that you can simply do that, have a conversation with God. And of course, as you grow and mature, you can have more structured prayers, but I think at least for now, it's cool to know that prayers don't need to be as structured as maybe we think, or if you come from a Catholic background or from a background where prayers are very structured, it's not necessarily like that when you're following Jesus. It's more of a conversation. So
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I like that. The idea of prayer as a conversation. Growing up, I actually so I wasn't necessarily in a Christian home either, but I did become a Christian at a young age. And I felt like I had a pretty good foundation of prayer, thankfully. Like in my youth ministry and the church I grew up in, they prepped us pretty well. And like I have these memories of, every Sunday night before youth group, our youth pastor, we always knew he would be in the prayer chapel for like an hour beforehand, just like on his knees praying, and he would invite students and leaders to come as well. And so I have these memories of just coming into that room and just sitting scattered throughout the room, and just everyone, and just like, popcorn prayer, whoever feels led to will lift their voice and pray, and everyone else will either listen to that and like kind of, you know, process their prayer as your own prayer, or they'd be praying silently in their own spot. And so those are just such sweet moments that communicated to me the importance of just like the importance of prayer, and like you were saying, Abel, this like just natural outflow of prayer rather than this like structured not that there's necessarily a problem with structured prayers, but it doesn't have to be this routine, this like perfected, this kind of precise thing. So I had a really good foundation for that. As I've grown in my faith, I've realized, and this is something that my faith has grown in general, is oftentimes with prayer we look for the answers to the prayers and the ways to like record the answers to prayers, which is a good thing to do. The Lord answers prayers, but I've realized that prayer is less about answers and more about presence and being with the Lord. Whether or not you feel that presence, that warmth, that closeness that we kind of seek after. Yeah. And prayer is actually a lot more of an intimate, just even casual sometimes thing. Like prayer has become a part of my life, not in that I've set aside 3-hour blocks of prayer in my days, but I've realized, I can pray as I walk into this room about to start this class, this meeting, this whatever. I can pray in my head during this conversation, just like behind the scenes, just say this quick prayer to the Lord. I can like express to the Lord as I'm driving, as I'm walking down the street, as I'm sitting in bed, like how I'm feeling. And so, I don't remember the name of this woman that I heard preach a couple months ago at a conference, but she had this phrase, which was, prayer is not a place to be perfect. It's a place to be honest. And that has been something that has really been where my heart has Lord has led me to that in my heart over time. It's a place not to have this perfect, structured, poetic, speech to God, but is just a place to be honest about where I'm at and seeking out the Lord's heart in that place. So that's cool. So that's how
When was the last time that you guys prayed that it was like you saw it answered and it was a faith builder?
It's the longest pause.
It's a great question.
Because I had one recently.
Yeah.
If give us a little time to think.
Yeah.
So me and Carolina I've had a bunch recently, actually. So one, just same quick. So one, my son, we went for an ultrasound. We're about a few weeks away from having the baby. And they say that there's a name for it, but they say the baby's abdominal area is not growing. It's like a few weeks behind the rest of its body. They have a name for it. And, so what it means is they have to induce Carolina because the baby's not getting the nutrients. And so they thought 37 weeks, we're going to have to induce her. And so we prayed. We just started praying like every day. We're just like, Lord, like, let him be healthy, let him be healthy, let him be healthy. And the next week, Thursday, she gets a doctor's appointment, and the doctor is looking at the report, and he's like, yeah, we kind of like read this wrong. And I must have read wrong, like what the nurses said. And, he's actually just small. And he was like really not that small. He's like 5.8 pounds, but he's like, oh, he's just small. So yeah, no, he's good. Like, so, and she's going to go full term now as long as the baby doesn't go early. Yeah. And it was like, I was like, okay, like we just prayed and just God answered. And then we're in the middle right now of we weren't planning on buying a place yet till 2025. We had like a five-year plan and everything, but we've been saving up. And I was just, this condo popped up on Zillow. It came. I was like, whoa. I showed Carolina. I said, let's check it out. She liked it. So we go there. We're like, this is great. I think we want this. Wow. And so we're like, okay, we'll make an offer tomorrow. Well, my buddy, who's a real estate agent, goes, yeah, someone made an offer and it's a cash offer. Oh, wow. Which like, we can't compete with that, So they're like, cash offer. So we start praying. So we made an offer above and said, hey, like we'll try to throw a competitive offer. And we just started praying for a few days. But I mean, like really praying. Yeah. Like this is like number one prayer, really pressing in on it and saying, God, We're asking you give it to us. We're asking you give it favor. We're asking you knock this other buyer out if that be your will, yada, yada. And now we're like, well, I'll tell you. Okay, so I asked unbelievable favor. Then this is what happens. I don't want to belabor the story, but then what happens? Like 3 days later, my agent says, I talked to their real estate agent, and she goes, "Is this Josiah Job from New Life?" So one, she knows me, which is weird. Yeah. It's crazy, crazy, right? Then she goes, "I have a unit down the block that my daughter has. It's bigger, it's renovated, same street, yada yada. Do you want to take a look at it?" So we go and take a look at that. It wasn't the right fit for us, but as we're walking out, my real estate agent, my buddy, goes, "Hey, the place that you prayed for is now open." Like the person backed out. The single girl cash offer backed out of that because she said it was too much space for her. And like this is like a 3-bedroom condo. It's not like that much space. It's not like that huge. But she's like, oh, it's like, who backs out because it's too much space, right?
Yeah.
Usually it's too little space.
Right.
And so it's just, we're in the process of it right now, and so we're praying like, Lord, just let it all close and everything. But like God has just been unbelievably faithful. So I'm praying in this. I'm ready to hear. I'm excited I have expectation for the end of the story, but whatever that is. But I'm having a lot of expectation. I'm praying, God, give us This is what I'm praying. God, give us unbelievable favor all the way through the end, and let us know. Let it be a story that brings you glory, and let it be a faith builder for us. Like one of those, just like it's only God stories. Even with something like it's important, but it's not everything. A place you live in. So I've had 2 recently.
That's so cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I think with me, anything that revolves around like youth ministry, just seeing students take steps of faith. Every Tuesday, leading up to Tuesday nights, I'm praying, like, Lord, just meet these students right where they're at. Like just break down barriers, open up hearts, open up ears. And every Tuesday night, man, there's such good reception to small group conversations. And like even just the amount of senior boys that we have in our group right now is kind of like, when I look at previous years of senior boys ministry, like typically they like are checking out around this time, but most of them are pressing in. And so I feel like there's just been a lot that I haven't named, but I've been praying for God just to continue to move, and he's just doing that. He's just moving in the ministry, moving in people's hearts, and changing lives. And so it's cool to see that. Like I can't name exactly one because it's constantly happening. Yeah. So just seeing the Lord move in that has been really like affirming, and it's definitely built up my faith where I'm like, okay, God, I see you, like you're doing your thing. And yeah, it's been exciting. So yeah. That's
cool. Yeah. I think one thing I've learned about prayer is it's about connecting with God's heart. And so one story that comes to mind, similar along the condo thing, we were looking for a place, and I just told God, okay, I've been saving for 3 years. Like, we need a place. It's time. It's really time. And I felt that too in my spirit as I was praying. And my sister went away, and we stayed at her condo, me and my other sister. And 5 minutes into being at her place, we hear a knock on her back door. And we're like, ugh, like, we don't know who this is, okay? And we don't live here. And we open the door, and it's her neighbor from upstairs. She said, "Hi, are you Victoria?" And we're like, "Oh, no, we're actually her sisters." And she's like, oh, well, I'm the neighbor that lives upstairs. I haven't met Victoria yet. So I just, I heard commotion down here, and I thought I'd come down and introduce myself. And we're like, oh. So we ended up talking with this woman. Her name's Christine. We ended up talking with her for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, just standing in the doorway. Yeah. And she's telling us all about herself. She's asking questions, and she's like, so, tell me about you guys. And we're like, well, actually, we're looking for a condo right now. We're kind of like believing in faith that there's like one for us. And she's not a believer. And she's like, oh, well, I know a lot of condo owners in this area. And I was like, what? Okay. And so she calls them. Right? Yeah. She starts calling them right there. And, one guy, he's like, no, sorry, we don't have any. She calls the one across the street, which we had never even looked at. And she calls the owner, and she's like, no, we don't have any spaces open, but I'll let you know if something opens. She's like, oh, sorry, I tried. I was like, yeah, no, it's totally fine. I was like, we're not going to get anywhere with this. Yeah. And fast forward a little bit. And so that night we said goodbye. That was it. We hadn't seen Christine pretty much after that, maybe a couple days later, she stopped by for something. And my sister comes back. We go home to my parents. And I get a text, and then I get a phone call. And I was at work, so I didn't answer. And then I get another phone call, and it's from Christine. And I'm just like, what is this woman calling? Like, I met her once.
Yeah.
And I call her back later, and she basically is like, hey, the woman called me from the one that owns the condo across the street. And there's a woman whose mother died. And so she is looking to move. And so would you be interested? Here's her number. And I was like, okay. Okay. And I text the woman. I said, take your time. Grief is really difficult. Like, there's no rush. So, but just letting you know, me and my sister are really open, and we, are really wanting to see your condo. Yeah. And I didn't hear from her for maybe 2 months. And at that point I was really wrestling. I was like, man, God, like I really thought that maybe this was it. We had seen one other condo in my sister's building, and it just wasn't it. I was like, I don't feel like this is home. And I was really doubting, like, and wrestling with, okay, God, I really felt like this was you. I felt the faith. I felt like you were behind this. And it was weird that we met her and she knew these people. And I just felt like he just so calmly was just like, just hold on. Classic. Just hold on, Lauren. Yeah. And I get a phone call from the woman who is selling the condo, and she said, I'm ready for you to come see it. And I'm like, oh, that was 2 days after I prayed.
Wow.
And I was just like, God, I'm wrestling. 2 days later, she calls me. And so we go see the condo, immediately walk in, and I'm like, this is it.
Wow.
This is it. Yeah. Like, this is home. It had everything that we were looking for.
Wow.
And it had more than what we were looking for. That was like really like it was just like a plus. So all in all, I haven't talked with Christine since then. Yeah. And that was in March of this year. And she came to church. That was another cool thing that happened out of that. But it was just cool that there was no way we would have found that condo unless it was through my sister's neighbor. And it was just, it's really cool how God connects the dots. Yeah. And how, you can find peace in the middle of like waiting for things and trusting God for things. So that would be my faith story.
Zach, you may be thinking about something, but let me throw something else at you.
Yeah, we can keep moving.
So maybe get a little vulnerable. What's a prayer that you've prayed that hasn't been answered yet? I threw it at Zach, but I guess any of us can.
I mean, okay, I have a smaller. I was actually gonna go. What's the time you had a prayer that just wasn't answered? This is not a big deal, so it's not too vulnerable. But
go deeper, Zach.
Yesterday, I was praying because my wife and I are looking for a car to buy. We're looking for a used car to buy, and we had first of all. So we've been praying through this whole process, Lord, like, help us find something that's good. So we've been looking online. We found a few cars that like, oh, this is the one. We've even had some of those connections like, oh, we just found out this person is connected to this person who works at this place. And we're like, oh, God connection? Whoa. Yeah. And so we reach out to them. We're like, oh, yeah, let me look at it. So there's one person. They're like, yeah, let me reach out to someone. I'll have them reach out to you. Here, look at the inventory. In the meantime, we look at the inventory. It's like, oh, there's a car here that's perfect. Let's do this. Like, this is going to go. And then the person doesn't reach out to us until like a few days later, and the car's gone. And we're like, oh, dang it. Yeah. Then looking at cars yesterday, this perfect one shows up. Like, oh, yeah, this is going to be it. And then there's another one also at the same dealership. So I put my interest in, was going to go and like check them out after work and test drive and all that kind of stuff. But there's, the whole thing with like negotiating car sales and all that kind of stuff, that's intimidating to me. And so I was like feeling really nervous about it, all this stuff. And so I was like praying, Lord, and we're also, not to get into too much detail, but we're also in the process of moving. So there's a lot of stress going on right now. And it's taking up a lot of mental space for me. So it's really heavy on my heart, heavy on my mind, and disrupting other things that need to get done. So I'm like, Lord, would you help me tonight to just like go in there confident, to like be able to negotiate well. Lord, I pray that these cars would be, that one of them would be just like a good fit. We don't have time to like go on these weeks long shopping. And I get there, sit down. I was like, the guy's like, okay, let me get the cars ready. He comes back after a few minutes, and he's like, sorry, one of our cars doesn't have the catalytic converter, and the other car needs its transmission to be
Wow.
repaired and renewed or replaced, whatever. I'm not a car guy, whatever. I probably sound so dumb right now. But so he's like, sorry, let me see if we got anything else in the inventory that matches what you're looking for. Nothing. I had driven all the way up north of the city, and I just sat there and I was like, but I prayed. Like, what? Where'd that come from? Why did this feel this way? And that was a moment where I was like, oh man, I prayed and nothing happened. And so I was like, okay, even though I had this feeling like, oh, I think, Lord, maybe you're going to do something with this. It didn't come to anything. So that happened yesterday. And that's just kind of a funny thing. And I ended up, and then I was like, oh, maybe, my friend lives nearby. I can go and like hang out with them. I haven't seen them in a while. Maybe this is just a way to get up. So I called them like, hey, I'm in the neighborhood. What's going on? Like, could I stop by and say hi? They're like, nope, sorry, we're busy. I was like, all right, let me drive back through traffic back home. And so it was just like a little, and the thing that was rough about it was like I'd spent all day thinking about it, making phone calls, like doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so there's a moment where I was like, oh man, today kind of wasn't great. And that wasn't a prayer that was answered how I thought it was going to be. And in these times, like times when that happens, there's all kinds of things that could happen. There could be, my heart was set in the wrong place. Maybe I misinterpreted like my own emotions and the situations and things like that. But then there's also the situation with like, I always like to tell people like people say this all the time, right? This is a popular thing that people say, that your prayer is always answered, but it's always either a yes, a no, or a no for right now, like not yet. Yeah. So I think that in the process, the way I'm processing this unanswered prayer, even though it's a small thing, I share that one because I feel like it's relatable to people. And I think we could also go deeper with some more vulnerable prayers. But for me, I think it wasn't a wasted prayer, which I think sometimes that's where our minds go. It wasn't a wasted prayer because I still expressed to the Lord my anxiety and my stress and my frustration. And like I said, right, like earlier, prayer is a place to be vulnerable. It's a place to be honest, not a place to be perfect, not a place to get answers necessarily. And so I think it was still valuable. Like I was able to express like, Lord, you see this is on my heart. You see this is on my mind. So would you help me to find this car? Yeah. Maybe he still will. Maybe I'll find a car tomorrow. Maybe I'll find a car next week. And it's just not when I'm thinking it. But so anyways, prayer that's not answered, that's how I'm processing it. That's how I think
it's kind of weird to go back, like think about we're going to listen to this in the future and some of these things will be answered already. Yeah. And what's crazy is then in the future, looking back, you almost sometimes kind of chuckle at yourself thinking this was not, like it felt so heavy in that moment. Yeah. Right. The stress, the weight of it, being in between, all of this stuff. And in that moment, it feels so heavy. But in the future, you look back and it's like, it's almost like it's weird hearing yourself in the past, knowing that it's been answered now and how it was answered, or it doesn't, maybe it's not going to be answered. Who knows in that time, but it is a little bit of a weird thing when you if you could do it with journals too, you look back at journals and you prayed something a year, especially when it's more time, like a year or 2 years. And you're like, man, I was so worried about that. And God just worked it out. Like he's just like navigated it or redirected me or brought me to a different path. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah. I think it's important to talk about because like the reason I shared that example, not just because it was so recent, but I think, some people might hear the stories that you guys shared. Oh, this miraculous like God connection with a condo, with these things, and like want that for themselves. Which like who doesn't want that, right? Yeah. That's super great. The Lord blessed you guys in that way. But some people might think that, pray that, and then not get that, and then say, "What's wrong with my faith? What's wrong with like God? Does he not, does he not want to bless me like he blesses Pastor Josiah or like things like that?" And which is not what you guys are intending, of course. So I'm just talking to our listeners and just saying like, it's important to realize prayer does not always look a certain way. Prayer does not always have the same outcome. And so it's important to look back I was just thinking yesterday, I need to start journaling more about my prayers because I lose track of the times that God has answered my prayer.
Right.
But also, those things don't become clear till after a season. You don't realize God answered this in like 12 different ways over time, not just in this powerful like interaction you had with one person. Sometimes it does happen, but not always. And it's important to remember that, we pray for so many things. So many of us have prayed for like a family member to get better when they've been sick, or when something has happened and they've lost their lives, and we wrestle with, Lord, what's happening? Like we hear so many stories of you, like, cancer patients having their cancer miraculously healed, of like all these things. What happened to my prayer that you didn't answer it? And so I just think that it's important to realize, like, prayer is not just about you getting the answer specifically clear right away and the way that you expect it. God is a God of wisdom. There's a lot more going on in this world than we realize, but there's still value in coming to God with those things and asking for those things, right? Even if the person is not healed, there's still something important about the fact that you prayed that prayer to God and had that like vulnerability and honesty.
So let me throw it to you guys. So like how do you guys personally manage when you pray and it's not answered? Whether you're in an in-between season of like the 2 months, Lord, where you're waiting, you're like, Lord, like, how do you manage that, your emotions, your faith? And I would also throw in there, how do you pray as a follower of Jesus? How do you balance or have harmony with both praying, God, I'm asking for this, but Lord, your will be done?
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, one thing, I don't think this, I mean, I can't say this on behalf of everyone. I'm just saying it on behalf of like my own personal walk with the Lord. But I think every time that I've prayed for something and it's been answered, or every time I've prayed for something and it's not been answered, I still gain value because I gain intimacy with God. And I think with the condo specifically, I was really lacking faith and trusting that God could do something beyond me, which sounds so small saying, but like, in humility, like, I'm so small, and I needed to learn that God was way bigger than what I could like make happen. And so that even if we didn't get that condo, I would still have faith and trust. Like, the lesson here is that whether it's answered or not, it is answered, kind of. Like, I gained an important, valuable lesson about who God is and who he is to me and who I am to him. And because, maybe I didn't get the condo, but God still really cares for me and he loves me and he's going to provide for me, like, in some way, shape, or form. And I think I know growing up, I think I had this mentality that when you pray, it was just about gaining the thing that you're praying for. But I can't stress enough, it's literally about connecting and gaining more of God. Like, that's the end zone of prayer. And the beautiful gift that he gives us, the desire of our heart, is just not necessarily the main thing. And I think, like, I think I personally still have a lot of questions, especially when it comes to like health and healing. And I've sat on the sidelines and watched, people just really wrestle with like suffering over their family members who are suffering and their friends, and it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's kind of where I have to like force myself to lean into faith, which is not my like go-to. It's more like control, understanding. I need to know why, like, give me the answers. And I just feel like Holy Spirit's like, no, Lauren, faith. That's an important part of walking with me and believing in me and who I am, and that I am good despite those things, and despite the prayer being answered or not the way you wanted it to. Like, in the end, you gained more of me and intimacy. So I think, I don't know if that answered the question, but I have to constantly be reminding myself, like, in any outcome, I still gain something. And it's very, very beautiful and very precious. And that's what I should kind of focus on when I pray.
Yeah. So when I was living in Phoenix a couple years ago, when I graduated from college, from the time I graduated from college to the time I went full time in ministry was about like 3 years, maybe a little bit over 3 years. And so like for a long time, my prayer had been for those 3 years, been wanting to go into full time ministry and wanting to be in full time ministry. And I felt like the Lord kept just delaying that. But I like kept coming back to him with that, right? And so eventually, about halfway through those 3 years, probably a year and a half, I started applying for a job at a church out in West Chicago. Went through a whole interview process with them, and then ended up not getting the job. So I was, still in that part-time in the church, part-time just working a normal job. And so, but even in the midst of all that, like I understood, I've always thankfully, I feel like the Lord really gave me a gift of understanding that he is completely sovereign, meaning that he's just in control of everything, how it happens, when it happens, like completely. Like I don't doubt that by any means, just because of the stories, scripture, people's experiences, my own experience. I just see that, to me, it's just super obvious. Even when I don't understand why things happen a certain way, just at the root of my being, I understand that God is sovereign. And so like, even if things don't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out, I know at the end of the day, he isn't surprised or shocked by that. He knew it was going to happen. So that had always, that sovereignty, I feel like God's sovereignty, that attribute that God, that attribute of God has really played a huge role in my prayers, whether they're answered or not answered. Because when they're not answered, I go back to that sovereignty. And when they are answered, I go back to that sovereignty. If they're not answered, then I'm like, I'm still upset, right? I'm still, when I got denied, the job out in the church in West Chicago, I was not personally hurt at them, but I was just like, saddened by the fact that I wasn't going to be able to go into full-time ministry. And actually it was a church that I grew up in. So like they knew me. So it was a really hard decision on both ends. Like,
seemed like it was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. It seemed like it was supposed to be. And so when it didn't happen, I was like, dang, I was heartbroken. But I understood very quickly, like, okay, like, God, I know you're sovereign. So even if it just didn't get answered at this time in this way, I know that you are working behind the scenes where I just can't see, and you're moving pieces. And of course, and he was moving pieces, right? Because a year and a half later, and the whole process with New Life begins, and throughout that process, I'm praying like, God, like I would love for this to happen. And after every interview, after every interview, and then when it finally like did happen, it felt great, because I'm like, Lord, it was on your timing, it was your plan. And I feel like I really got to just enjoy that and sit in that. And even coming into New Life, I was still bivocational, but it felt like there was, the Lord's like relax, like you'll get there eventually, just chill out, like enjoy the ride for now. And so that sovereignty piece really plays a huge part. Knowing that God is completely in control of every single situation, no matter how it turns out, brings me a lot of peace in unanswered prayers or no prayers.
For me, one of the things that when I'm praying through even these situations, these are the last few weeks, right? As I feel, I don't know if I want to say tension, but that's the word I'll use. It's kind of a tension between these two things. I have a tension between, I want the prayer to be answered, whether it's my son's health or we want this condo for us.
Yeah.
So I'm clearly asking for that. At the same time, it's more than words. It's a heart position. My heart, if this is my heart stays like this.
Open-handed.
My heart stays with an open hand. And so I have an open hand, even though I'm praying and praying and praying and praying clearly for what it is, my heart stays like this. And for whatever reason, what I feel like, this is my intuition in my sense. My intuition and sense is that when I have this position, my prayers get answered much more often. And I would say it guards your heart to have your hand open and not closed.
Yeah.
What closed is for me is, I'm expecting the outcome.
Yeah.
The outcome's gonna happen.
Yeah.
This condo's gonna be mine. My son's gonna be healthy. And so it's a weird tension. And I don't know if I'm explaining it well with my words, but it's a weird tension because on one end, I am praying with so much faith and expectation that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
At the same time, my posture is, Lord, let your will be done.
Yeah.
Like I know that I'm praying this and I'm asking for this, but Lord, let your will be done. If it doesn't happen, I accept that. So I
Yeah.
think it's a position of like, I accept whatever you have.
Yeah.
And I think the dangerous place for us to be at when we're praying, and maybe even cloud it or mask it or cover it and say it's just faith, is to pray and have a closed hand and say that's faith. Because I think you can pray with it with faith and have an open hand for whatever you
Yeah,
receive,
for sure.
instead of just praying with faith and like it's gonna be this.
Yeah.
Because I almost feel like you put your and I sometimes I see this, your trust in the outcome.
Right.
And the outcome is going to be the outcome that you want.
Right.
Yep.
Instead of being open to saying, I don't know what God has for me. And seriously, I feel like this posture has allowed me to navigate some of the most difficult things I've had in my life, because I cross a line in my heart more than my words. It's a line in my heart that I'm just like, God, whatever you bring, my son's not healthy. I told the cystic fibrosis story. We don't get this place. Like I'm in it right now with the place. If for whatever, we're in a contract, but for whatever reason it falls out, I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah.
I would be disappointed. I
Yeah.
want the place.
Yeah.
My wife would be disappointed, but my hand's like this. And I view it as we talked about narrative the other day, like one of the things that helps me is I just put it in the narrative of faith. Oh, okay. God has something better for me. That's a better narrative and it's a faith narrative and a hope narrative and a positive narrative versus the narrative of, man, I lost it and God's so tough on me. Like that's a choice.
Yeah.
You have to choose what narrative you're going to believe.
Yeah.
God's not giving this to me, or maybe he wants to bless somebody else with it because he's got something better in store for me down the road.
Yeah.
That's a faith-filled narrative of hope and expectation for the future versus, man, God took it and now we're not going to have it. We won't have enough room for 2 kids and this is so tough and there's nothing like it on the market. Like, what does that do for me?
Right.
That doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And so I take it and I use the faith narrative. God, you do all things good. You can use all things for the good of those who love you. You can do all of it, God, all of it. So I just have faith in what you say.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, to like nuance that, I think is what you mean too. Like to nuance that that God has something better planned for me. It isn't necessarily better in your eyes, like how you're viewing it. Because I think people can take that and be like, they run with it like, oh, it's going to be better. So that means it's going to have more room. It's going to have, and they just look at it through a materialistic lens. And God's like, okay, your better may not be my better, but yes, I do have something better for you, even if you don't think it's better for you. So like, yeah.
Yeah, you're not putting faith in your own, what you can figure out
Right.
as what
Yes.
it is. You're putting faith in
Yeah.
the God who has much better plans.
Yes.
I think that, I just lost what I was about to say. Oh, that's rough.
Well, let me say.
I got it.
That's the best when you regain it.
Yeah.
I lost it again.
I got it. We're on air right now. So we've been talking about prayer connecting us to the heart of God, right? And part of what happens in the process then of prayer, and when we talk about our expectations, is when you get connected to the heart of God, you become to be shaped in that heart and in the image of God as you become vulnerable and intimate and close with the Lord.
Totally.
He shapes you into who he wants for you to be, which is a good, beautiful thing, but is so often different than our expectations. And so we this open hand means we come ready to be shaped by in our experience of prayer.
Yeah.
And realizing ultimately, back to what you were saying, Abel, about the sovereignty of God, is the mirror. Like when you look at the sovereignty of God, when you're looking at, from our perspective, I guess like the other side of the coin of sovereignty on our end is faith, is trust. Like God's responsibility is to be sovereign and to guide things. Our responsibility is to trust, and we're able to do that because God's got this like really great track record of being good.
Really great.
You know, like pretty good. Like he's pretty solid at
Perfect
it. So
track record.
that like, and that's why it's so important, one, to keep a journal, right? To like find some way to keep track of your own journey in prayer, but also to be in community and to see how God is like working in ways bigger than you. He's answered, I'm encouraged by hearing these answers to prayers, even as I'm in my own search for, a car and different things like that. And so my challenge then is not to become wrapped up in my expectation or bitterness or jealousy or things like that, but instead to say, God, what will this look like for me to be shaped in your image as I come to you in prayer.
And it's so difficult. What we're talking about is so difficult to do when you're in it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like it
Yes.
takes that muscle of faith being
Yes.
grown and
Yeah.
stretched and built, because it really is a difficult thing to do. And I'm just from my experience, when and it's not across the board, but generally the position of my of saying, God, I'm willing to receive whatever the outcome is, and yet I'm praying clearly and hard and persevering for a certain outcome. I find that my prayers get answered more when I have that position, and I find a clear correlation in my experience with my prayers that my prayers are often a lot less answered when I do this.
Yeah.
And I think this is a position of faith and trust.
Yeah.
But when I am like it, when I know what it feels like too, which is the craziest thing. I know what it feels like when I haven't crossed the line of like, no, this is what it's going to be. It needs to be this. It has to be this. I have to have it in this time, like this and this. And I close like this. It's almost, and it was the same thing before I met Carolina. Right before I met Carolina, I was having conversations with my dad. Like, I think that I would be okay. I think I had this like, I need to get married, and I'm da-da-da-da. And then I was like, I think I'm like really fulfilled in every area right now. I think I'm still gonna get married, but I think I'd be okay like if I didn't get married. And so that was, I think, this for me. And I met Carolina immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
So the thing is, though, you can't manipulate it.
No,
It's not like you can't like work it like,
Has to be genuine.
It has to be genuine.
Yeah.
It has to be and that's the crazy thing about it. It has to be a genuine crossing of your heart.
Yeah.
Where God sees your heart position of saying, God, I trust you. My hand's open. If you want to give me a wife, if you want to give me a house, if you want to give me this, you want to
Right.
give me health,
Yeah.
God, I'm ready to receive it. But
Yeah.
if not, God, you're still good no matter what you give me or no matter what my life looks like.
Yeah.
It is a secret to having prayers answered, and also a secret, I think, sometimes to why prayers aren't answered.
Yeah. So I was thinking as you were saying the comparing the open hand as opposed to I'm also praying, or not opposed to, but balancing the open hand versus and not versus
With faith.
not-
With
with
faith,
faith. Yeah. And it's biblical. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was Jesus. In the New Testament talks about it has the story of the woman who goes and or the woman who goes and bothers a judge, continues to bother the judge about help me out with the story, but she continues to bother the judge about something, and he ends up granting her request just because, he literally says in the scripture, just because she kept pressing him about it. And if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, this is a story that Jesus talks about in prayer specifically, and bringing your request before God. And so like I think that ties into what you're saying. Like there's a balance of open hand, and also it's okay to ask God for things and to persevere and to want a certain outcome. And then ultimately, you know, on top of God's sovereignty, I think the foundation, right, is the gospel, and knowing that in Jesus, the ultimate request, so to say, has been answered, right? That we have fulfillment in him, life in him. And so that even if worse comes to worse here on earth, you know that for eternity, you're spending it with Jesus and his presence. And so that to me, like on top of God's sovereignty, like that is the ultimate, like, boom, when it comes to like prayers not being answered or prayers feeling like, yeah, God's not hearing you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. As we come to a close in this episode, can we go through and just answer, just in a sentence, one thing? We've not exhausted the conversation on prayer. We could have multiple more episodes on this. But just for someone looking to implement prayer into their life, what is just one thing that you would say to them? Something quick as we end.
I use a prayer journal 3 times a week. So I record 3 prayers a week. So it's not like every day that I'm doing it, but I try to get in 3 prayers recorded a week. And that's just really cool to be able to look back on and to see stuff answered, and to be able to write your prayers. It's just a whole different exercise of the mind. You're using a different part of your brain. That is, it's cool to connect to God in that way.
Yeah. I would say just realize that prayer does not have to look like what you think it looks like, and what people say it has to look like. Prayer is a natural relationship with the Lord. Sometimes it requires you to lock yourself in a room, turn off the lights, throw your phone into the other room, and focus and be still. Sometimes it means as you walk. Sometimes it means in the middle of a conversation. Sometimes it means in the busyness of life, you can say a prayer. The Lord is always with you. He doesn't require a specific form. He doesn't require a specific routine. Routine is good.
Yeah.
So try to implement it, but realize that God is with you and hears you at all times. So be honest with wherever you're at.
Yeah.
I would say in what we're talking about today with the open hand, I would say practically how to pray that is I would pray and ask clearly what you want from God. And then I would say, but Lord, let your will be done.
Yep.
And another way to say that was, Lord, I trust that you're going to do what's ever best, even if that doesn't feel like what's best to me in the moment.
Yeah. It's good.
I'd say do your research. There's a lot of different ways to pray. There's creative ways, meditation, supplication, thanksgiving, all the above.
Books.
Tons of books on prayer.
Praying scripture.
Journaling, artistically praying. So just do your research and experiment. Try praying in different ways and connect with God and see what happens.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, so that's our conversation on prayer for today. So thank you for listening to another episode of Sippin' Saints. Keep on sipping.
Keep on sipping.